Scripture to consider before the news. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The he referenced is the prince that shall come, which will confirm a deal to start the 70th week spoken of by Daniel the prophet in Babylon. Now to the news. Devil's bargain, sacrificing Yemen for a Saudi-Israeli peace deal. Earlier this month, Morocco normalized ties with Israel. In exchange, the United States agreed to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. This announcement continues the trend of an Arab-Israeli rapprochement outside of a final status settlement with the Palestinians. This agreement, along with the earlier Abraham Accords, normalizing Israel's relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Sudan, are positives in a region too often known for war. Fortunately, more peace deals are likely as the Middle East emerges from the post-World War II era. In its effort to promote regional peace and build an Israeli-Sunni alliance against Iran, the US is rushing to offer Saudi Arabia a gift in exchange for a normalization deal with Israel. And the gift? In its final weeks, the Trump administration would likely designate the Houthis in Yemen as a foreign terrorist organization, FTO, making it a federal crime to knowingly provide material support to any Houthi-controlled entity or person. On its face, prohibiting resources to the Houthi seems reasonable. To be certain, the Houthis are bad actors, a ruthless terror organization that has attacked US interests directly, and that bears primary responsibility for Yemen's humanitarian catastrophe, where more than 24 million people are in desperate need of humanitarian relief. With this designation, the administration seeks to sanction the Houthis, weaken Iran, strengthen Saudi Arabia, and bolster the exiled Yemeni government. In reality, however, the gambit will likely further destabilize the Arabian Peninsula. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you can get notified whenever new Bible prophecy news videos are uploaded. Scripture to consider. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. The land of Israel will be parted with Palestine. Now to the news. Pakistan to UAE says it can't recognize Israel until Palestine resolved. Pakistan says it has made it clear to the United Arab Emirates, UAE, that Islamabad cannot recognize Israel until the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not resolved. I categorically presented Pakistan's stance on Israel to the UAE's foreign minister that we will not and cannot establish a relationship with Israel until a concrete and permanent solution to the Palestine issue is found, Pakistan's foreign minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi told reporters in the central city of Multan on Monday. Qureshi's statement came days after his visit to the UAE, which was seen by many as crucial amid rumors that Islamabad had secretly sent a messenger to Israel. Islamabad denied the reports, which appeared mainly in the Israeli media. Responding to questions regarding reports about alleged pressure from Saudi Arabia, the UAE and other Gulf states for recognition of Israel, Qureshi said he explained to his UAE counterpart the depth of emotions and feelings Pakistanis have about Palestine and Kashmir. The UAE foreign minister, he contended, fully understood our feelings on the two issues. Rebuffing reports about pressure on Islamabad to recognize Israel, he said, "Number 1, there will be no pressure on us nor there is. Number 2, we have to make decisions keeping Pakistan's interests in view and not because of any pressure. We have a policy and we are still steadfast on it." He said Prime Minister Imran Khan had, time and again, clarified there is no pressure on us in this regard. Khan made headlines last month when he revealed that Islamabad had been under pressure from some friendly nations to recognize Israel. Although he stopped short of naming the countries despite being repeatedly asked whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim countries, many believe the Pakistani leader was referring to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The UAE, Bahrain and Morocco recently established diplomatic and economic relations with Israel, while reports suggest some other Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, are also weighing the options to normalize ties. In recent years, Pakistan's relations with its traditional Gulf allies have come under strain due to Islamabad's neutrality on several issues, including the war in Yemen and the blockade on Qatar imposed by a Saudi Arabia-led Arab alliance. Riyadh also appears to be irked by criticism from Islamabad over its lukewarm stance on Pakistan's long-standing dispute with India over the Himalayan territory of Kashmir, claimed in full by both the South Asian neighbors. In other news, the Vatican whore of the Book of the Revelation chapter 17 permits use of COVID-19 vaccines made using aborted fetal tissue. The Vatican told Roman Catholics on Monday that it was morally acceptable to use COVID-19 vaccines even if their production employed cell lines drawn from tissues of aborted fetuses. A note from the Vatican's doctrinal congregation, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, said the use of such vaccines was permitted as long as there were no alternatives. Both the Pfizer Inc. and Moderna Inc. vaccines have some connection to cell lines that originated with tissue from abortions in the last century, according to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, which issued a separate note to American Catholics last week. The Vatican note said the granting of moral legitimacy was related to the principle, differing degrees of responsibility of cooperation in evil. This meant that because the pandemic is such a grave danger, such vaccines can be used in good conscience with the certain knowledge that it does not constitute formal cooperation with the abortion from which the cells used in production of the vaccines derive, the note said. In the absence of safe vaccines made from other sources, it is morally acceptable to receive COVID-19 vaccines that have used cell lines from aborted fetuses in their research and production process. The American bishops said the vaccines employed cell lines drawn from tissue obtained from 2 abortions that took place in the 1960s and 1970s and that often have been replicated since. The Vatican note said use of such vaccines does not in itself constitute a legitimation, even indirect, of the practice of abortion. It urged the pharmaceutical industry to develop completely ethical vaccines and governments and international organizations to make them accessible to poorer nations. The Vatican note said that while the use of vaccines was voluntary, the common good may recommend vaccination, especially to protect the weakest and most exposed. Lastly, Pentagon threatens Iran as region braces for one-year anniversary of Soleimani killing. On the same day the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad's Green Zone came under attack by a hail of 8 rockets fired by unknown militants, the United States threatened Iran with military action should it decide to pursue any future retaliation for the U.S. killing of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani last January. Sunday's attack, widely believed to have been the work of Iran-backed Shia militia or an allied group, triggered the embassy's counter-rocket defense system and resulted in at least 1 Iraqi civilian death and limited damage to the embassy complex. General Kenneth McKenzie, who heads the U.S. Central Command (CENTCOM), is currently touring the region ahead of the anniversary of the Jan. 3 killing of Soleimani. The trip was unannounced and is being widely interpreted as sending a strong message to leaders in Tehran. Days after the Soleimani assassination, the region was on the edge of war. Also given Iran responded by launching multiple ballistic missiles on American bases in Iraq, which the Pentagon at first claimed resulted in no casualties, though later it was revealed troops suffered widespread concussions from the missile attack, dubbed traumatic brain injury. At the very least, mass anti-American protests are expected both in Iran and Iraq, likely outside of the Green Zone near the U.S. Embassy. The Pentagon and State Department have signaled they are making full preparations to beef up security ahead of the first week of January. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And stay tuned to Watchman Report for more Bible prophecy news.